Welcome back to the archive. Have you ever looked at your life and wondered if the walls around you were real? Or just a very well-constructed cage? Today, we are opening a special chapter of the archive, the architecture of the trap. We aren't looking at slashers or simple monsters. We are diving into stories where the environment itself is the enemy. From a vertical prison where hunger is the only law, to a suburban neighborhood you can never leave. Oh, take a we're playing. What if you could travel thousands of years into the future without even trying? Today we are breaking down the 2017 mind-bending survival story. Time Trap. A group of students travels to a remote cave in Texas, searching for their missing archaeology professor. Once inside, things get strange. The air is heavy, the walls shimmer, and when they look up through a hole in the cave ceiling, the sun flashes like a rapid strobe light. The terrifying logic of the cave is that it sits within a unique geological anomaly, where time passes exponentially, slower than on the surface. What feels like a few minutes inside is decades or even centuries passing outside. When the students try to climb back up, they discover they are now thousands of years in the future, facing hyper-evolved humans and ancient Neanderthals simultaneously, all trapped in the same physical space but separated by time. The film is a masterclass in slow-burning cosmic horror, forcing its characters to realize that their entire life, everyone they knew and the world itself has died. In the final, hopeful but unsettling twist, the survivors are pulled out of the trap by futuristic rescue drones, leaving the cave not just to survive, but to inherit a world they will never truly understand. Have you ever wanted to erase the past? Today we are breaking down the 2019 sci-fi drama Synchronic. Anthony Mackie stars as Steve, a paradetic in New Orleans who discovers a pattern of bizarre and brutal deaths linked to a new designer drug called Synchronic. The catch is, the deaths look accidental unless you notice the artifacts. A caveman's claw, a civil warrior saber. Steve realizes the drug doesn't just get you high. It makes you travel through time. The film's brilliant drug-based time travel has a strict physiological logic. The past isn't a fixed reality. It's like another dimension you phase into, depending on where you take the pill. Steve, who has a malignant brain tumor, decides to use the last of his time to find his partner's missing daughter, who got lost in the past. It's a beautifully melancholic story about mortality and sacrifice. The climax where Steve gives up his last pill to save the girl, trapping himself forever in a trench during the Civil War as a ghost. It's a pure, self-inflicted reality trap that'll break your heart. This is a story that proves the most dangerous journey. Stanley Kubrick was a man defined by a level of perfectionism that bordered on madness. But his greatest obsession, the one that haunted him until his final breath, was his unproduced biopic of Napoleon Bonaparte. Following the monumental success of 2001, A Space Odyssey, Kubrick didn't just want to make a historical movie. He wanted to create the definitive cinematic document of the 19th century. A film so accurate and grand that it would effectively replace history books. His preparation was staggering, a feat of research that remains unparalleled in Hollywood history. Kubrick amassed a personal library of over 500 books on the French emperor and created a massive, handwritten card catalog containing over 15,000 meticulously cross-referenced notes on every person in Napoleon's inner circle, tracking their movements across Europe day by day. He sent assistants to travel across the continent, collecting samples of the actual soil from battlefields like Waterloo to ensure the color and texture on screen would be authentic. His vision for the production was equally insane. He negotiated with the Romanian government to borrow 40,000 infantry soldiers and 10,000 cavalry to act as extras, planning to film massive candlelight and grand palaces. Kubrick intended for the film to be a 3-hour mix that explored not just the tactical genius of the conqueror but the intimate, psychological decay of a man who owned the world but lost his soul. However, the project hit a wall of cold corporate reality. Major studios, terrified by the ballooning budget and the commercial failure of another Napoleonic film released at the time, suddenly pulled their funding. Kubrick was left with an 800-page screenplay thousands of sketches for costumes made of specialized paper, and a vision that was simply too big for the world to handle. Today, Kubrick's Napoleon exists only as a legendary ghost movie, a haunting reminder of what happens when a director's genius outpaces the industry's courage, leaving us to forever wonder how the master of cinema would have reimagined the rise and fall of history's most complex tyrant. The Stiverse forever. The story of Tim Burton's Superman Lives remains one of the most bizarre and fascinating chapters in graveyard of unproduced cinema, a project that promised to deconstruct the Man of Steel through the lens of Gothic isolation and Burton-esque 1990s counterculture. In 1996, Warner Brothers sought to reboot their most iconic franchise by hiring Kevin Smith to write a script based on the death of Superman comic arc. But the project took a turn for the surreal when Tim Burton was brought on to direct, with the legendary Nicolas Cage cast as Clark Kent. This wasn't going to be the wholesome, patriotic Superman of the past. Burton and Cage envisioned a hero who felt like a literal alien, a socially awkward outcast who was terrified of his own godlike power. The production spent millions of dollars on pre-production, creating mind-bending concept art that replaced the traditional spandex suit with a bioorganic iridescent regeneration suit that glowed with internal energy. Nicolas Cage famously participated in costume tests wearing a long-haired, muscular prosthetic suit that looked more like a creature from a fever dream than a superhero. The plot was equally strange, featuring a spider-like Brainiac, a depressed Lex Luthor, and a giant robotic spider in the third act, a specific demand from the producer that became a Hollywood legend. Burton's vision was a dark, operatic exploration of identity and alien nature. But as the budget spiraled toward an unheard-of $190 million and previous big-budget failures scared the studio, Warner Brothers pulled the plug just weeks before filming was set to begin. The film collapsed under the weight of its own eccentricity, leaving behind only grainy test footage of Cage in the glowing suit and a script that felt more like a psychedelic nightmare than a summer blockbuster. It remains a ghost of a movie that reminds us of a time when Hollywood was willing to be truly weird, leaving fans to forever wonder if Nicolas Cage's Superman would have been a misunderstood masterpiece or a spectacular disaster that would have changed the superhero genre a decade before the MCU was even a dream. The sequel to Ridley Scott's Gladiator is now a reality, but the version that almost existed in the mid-2000s is widely considered the most insane screenplay ever written for a major Hollywood studio. After the massive success of the first film, Wrestle, Crowe didn't want the story of Maximus's Decimus Meridius to end with his death. So he personally recruited the poetic musician Nick Cave to write a script that would bring his character back to life. Cave, who had never written a blockbuster before, produced a screenplay titled Christ Killer that defied every convention of the historical epic. The story begins with Maximus in a bleak purgatorial afterlife, where he is tasked by the Roman gods who are dying and losing their power to a new, singular deity to return to Earth and assassinate Jesus Christ and his followers. Maximus is resurrected, but instead of a simple revenge story, he becomes an immortal warrior, cursed to fight through every major conflict in human history. The script featured mind-bending sequences where Maximus battles through the Crusades, the World Wars, and even the Vietnam War, eventually ending with him as a high-ranking official in the modern-day Pentagon. It was a meditation on the eternal nature of violence and the tragedy of a man who can never find peace because he is the literal avatar of war. While Ridley Scott was fascinated by the sheer audacity of the idea, the studio executives were understandably terrified by a pitch that involved the hero of a beloved historical drama trying to kill the Messiah. The project was deemed unfilmable and too sacrilegious for a mainstream audience. leaving Cave's script to circulate as a legendary underground document. It remains a ghost of a movie that would have transformed a Sandalzan's hordes epic into a metaphysical, time-traveling odyssey, proving that sometimes the most creative ideas are simply too dangerous for the silver screen to contain. Masterpiece that asks, if you were at the top, would you look down or would you just keep eating? What if the person sitting across from you at dinner looked like your best friend? Talked like your best friend but came from a completely different version of reality? Today we are breaking down the ultimate low-budget mindbender, Coherence, shot in just 5 days with mostly improvised dialogue. This film creates more dread with a single glow stick than most blockbusters do with millions in CGI. The story begins on the night of Miller's comet. 8 friends gather for a dinner party, but as the comet passes overhead the power goes out, and cell phones shatter for no reason. The logic of the film is rooted in quantum decoherence and Schrödinger's cat. When 2 of the friends walk down the street to a house that still has lights on, they return terrified because the house they saw was their own, and the people inside were them. The comet has cracked reality into an infinite number of parallel bubbles. Every time someone steps outside into the darkness, they cross a dark zone and randomly enter a different version of the house. The dinner party quickly turns into a paranoid war zone. They try to leave notes for themselves, only to realize that the other versions of them are doing the same thing, but with slight, terrifying differences. The true horror isn't the science, it's the psychological collapse. As the night progresses, the protagonist, M, realizes that her original friends are gone, replaced by strangers from other timelines who are just as scared as she is. The great deception is the finale. Driven to desperation, M slips out of the house and wanders through the dark zone until she finds a reality where the dinner party is actually happy, and the comet hasn't ruined everything yet. She decides to kill the other M to take her place. But as the sun rises, a single phone call proves that you can't just murder your way into a perfect life. Coherence is a chillin'. A reminder that of cinema prove that the best stories don't need giant monsters to keep us awake at night. They just need a single, terrifying what if. Which of these realities would you find the hardest to survive? Let me know in the bye.